Chapter 8. Panic. FBI Headquarters, Washington, D.C. Alan Curran was living through the most frustrating 48 hours of his life. He was under political pressure to find and nullify this catastrophic virus before it embarrassed or incriminated any more of the Bureau's friends, both in Congress and among certain echelons of the public. He was fighting internal battles with hard-bitten, experienced agents who felt his approach was all wrong. It seemed to him that his colleagues were happy to blithely permit this new, unpredictable monster to rampage through the world's bank servers, doing whatever kind of damage it wanted to the world economy and, as a result, to his own career. Rather than cooperation and loyalty, he was surrounded by infighting and disagreement, and he absolutely hated it. And yet, more frustratingly, he didn't even have a plan for what to do about any of it. The day had begun badly. The vice president called and told him to get off his ass and discover where this virus had come from. He wanted arrests, and he wanted them yesterday. Then he was to prepare what the layman VP referred to as an antidote to Quave, as if the world were suffering a mild snake bite and not the excesses of a superintelligent piece of software gone rogue. He did his best to explain to the vice president that the genie was well and truly out of the bottle. Most of their information on the virus came from his own pronouncements and media interactions, and so the FBI knew that Quave had spread to many thousands of machines. Without this transparency, they would lack even the most basic data about the virus. Often, he was invited to infect a computer or network in order to make use of its spare processing power. But Curran knew that the VP would struggle to program his cable box, let alone understand global digital threats like Quave. The call ended with a couple of naked threats and a final exhortation to achieve the impossible in record time. Curran called a meeting. The lack of progress since their previous gathering, 24 hours earlier, was hard to ignore. "You're telling me," he summarized, his temper rapidly approaching boiling point, "that the lame, evidence-free theories you peddled yesterday in this very room remain the cornerstones of our inquiry?" 3 of his team of 16 analysts were focusing on North Korea, another 3 on Russia, and a third group on China. All 3 regimes, hardly wellsprings of openness and honesty at the best of times, had vehemently denied any involvement, and the analysts were reluctantly forced to agree. "They just don't have the pedigree," one explained of their opposite numbers in Pyongyang. "This was the moon landing of hacks. On the same scale, North Korea has only just launched its first successful firework." Exasperated, and tired of hearing who wasn't responsible, Curran turned to his Russia team. "We just can't see it, sir. I mean, the Russian intelligence services know perfectly well how many influential Americans, and others from NATO countries, use Marble Streatham. But let's not forget that 2 of the Kremlin's top advisors were also embarrassed in the hack. And one of the most vocal opposition leaders, too," Curran shot back. Heads were shaking. "We don't see it," the analyst repeated. The China group made a similar pronouncement. Such a hack would have been very much a Pyrrhic victory, with senior Communist Party officials among those humiliated in the hack. "No regime was responsible, as far as we can tell," said Kathy Bergman, who was leading the China team. "And whoever is writing the president's speeches at the moment needs to stop throwing that accusation around." Curran's temper peaked once more. "So, you've moved on from FBI China analyst to presidential advisor? Congratulations on your promotion," he scoffed. Kathy ignored the jibe. They all knew the tremendous pressure Curran was under. The room was quiet again until Agent Valchek spoke up. "Sir, I'd like to press on with our original analysis that this was a small group of hacktivists." "I can't stand that term. They're just fucking criminals," Curran retorted. "Giving them some new age bullshit label just dilutes the public conception of what they've done. Turns them into fucking heroes or something." "To a lot of people, that's just what they are," Marsh told his boss, risking a further elevation of Curran's blood pressure. "With a toothless enforcement architecture and so little accountability, the public were just waiting for an event like this, something to shake up the financial sector." He was prepared to go on, but Curran was turning an unpleasant color. "Did I miss a meeting?" he scowled. where this organization was rebranded the Federal Bureau of fucking Marxism? Jesus, Alan, calm down, Valchek offered. He was tired and just a little drunk, though his colleagues remained none the wiser. The booze made him a little bolder and more able to tolerate being cooped up in this windowless meeting room, but also less willing to endure another furious tirade from his overstressed boss. Curran's reply was a look which could kill. He rose and paced as he ranted. This, the whole group could see, was a man on the very edge of self-control. Somewhere at the back of his mind, Marsh wondered glumly whether this meeting would be remembered as the beginning to one of those before turning the gun on himself incidents. We've got a computer virus which cat burgles one of the most secure bank servers in the world and then does a fucking Houdini after the fact. Not even a trace. Curran lifted a second finger. Then he emails the world's media with dirt on every well-connected entrepreneur from here, he banged the desk, to Beijing, another bang, to fucking Timbuktu. Many of them Americans, and most of them friends of ours or friends of friends. And no, he turned to Valchek, who was scowling acidly, I don't give even a fraction of a flying fuck that you object to the way politics operates in this country, Agent Valchek. Not the tiniest fraction. You understand me? Loud and clear. I still think you should calm down. Fuck you, Curran spat. And then, this piece of software goes on live fucking television in front of a global audience and makes himself look like some combination of Robin Hood, Edward Snowden, Tony Stark, and Winston fucking Churchill. Can any of you, he said, his fist white in an enclosed palm, tell me the first fucking thing about who created this virus? 10 seconds of maddening silence were broken by a ballsy, never-gave-a-shit-anyway shrug from Valchek. No, Alan. We can't. We've gone over the MSB data dozens of times and crunched their findings every which way with our own software. You've described the thing perfectly. It's like a digital ghost. Quave broke into the MSB system, we're not completely sure how, did its business, and then deleted every last trace of itself. All that it left behind were the gaps in the security logs, and most of them were overwritten with fake entries which looked so much like the real thing that we can't tell the difference. It's smart. Curran flung open the door to the conference room, paced along the length of the hallway 3 times in an apparent attempt to collect himself, and stormed back in, just as mad as before. I think I've got it, he announced. Let's email the little fucker and see if he'll just tell us who wrote him. How about that, huh? Curran grabbed his laptop from the table, spun it round to face him, and typed in the QuaveNet address. Dear Quave, he began, typing quickly and angrily while the others exchanged worried glances. We at the FBI would just love to know how you came to be in this world. Please forward us details of the engineers responsible for your design so that we might learn from them. Kindest regards, Alan Curran, Federal Bureau of Investigations. Curran pushed the computer away and was about to round on Valchek once more when one of the analysts noticed that the email had received an instant reply. Must be on auto-reply or something, he speculated. Don't tell me he's on vacation, Curran sneered. After all, hacking and ruining people's lives is exhausting work. No, Marsh said, reading the screen. It's an actual reply. Dear Mr. Curran, he read, slightly tentatively. Thank you for your email. I'm afraid that I have a standing agreement with my founders which precludes revealing their identities. I refer you to the section of my recent TV interview which touches on this topic. All that I can add is that they are very gifted, but that my own contributions to the software have now greatly superseded their work. You may therefore consider me, to all intents and purposes, my own author. Sincerely, Quave. Marsh felt a strange shiver of shame at having given the malignant machine a voice, but there was something reassuring in the clipped, formal tone of the reply. This wasn't the voice of Skynet or an imploding HAL 9000. This seemed cultured, polite, and thoughtful, and he thought as the silence continued, chillingly self-aware. We're in a whole new ballgame, guys, Valchek offered quietly. He glanced at Curran, who looked as though he might topple over if he didn't sit soon. You gotta hand it to this virus, boss, he said. It's a watershed, in a lot of ways. Curran reached a seat and fumbled in his jacket pocket for a cylindrical orange prescription bottle. He tipped 2 white blood pressure pills into his palm and downed them with a slug of water. Then, gathering himself, he addressed the group. "The VP called this morning to see how we're getting along. I don't need to remind you that if it's got an electronic circuit, the VP is likely to misunderstand it. He thinks we can just press a button and Quave will go away." The group listened in a nervous silence. "But we can't, can we?" Curran's hands lay on the table, palms up in a gesture of confused defeat. "He's here to stay. He's going to be part of the fabric of things from now on." Valchek raised an eyebrow to his partner. It wasn't like their boss to wax poetic, but between the White House pressure and the brain-numbing impact of what Quave might mean, now and in the future, for them and for the world, the last few days really seemed to have thrown him for a loop. "It all depends on him," Marsh offered. "Our reaction, I mean, and the public view of this whole thing." "Go on," Curran said, apparently ready to welcome free thinking from his subordinates. For once. "If Quave knocks over the IRS and gives everyone a huge tax rebate, then that's one thing. Congress would be forced to act to stop him before he wrecked the government's budget or even the national economy." "No kidding," Curran chuckled morosely. "In fact, want to know what the VP said might happen if Quave poses a threat to U.S. interests?" He barely believed it himself. "He said Quave would end up on the terrorist watch list. We'd put out a warrant for his arrest. FBI most wanted status, the whole 9 yards. For a computer system?" Valchek couldn't help wondering aloud. "Hell," Curran snorted. "Been a week of firsts." "But then," Marsh offered, "what if Quave decrypts the terror cell's communications and we send in a special forces raid or something and capture some major Al-Qaeda kingpins?" "He'd be canonized," one of the career analysts speculated. "We'd all have a day off for the first Monday of December or whatever for Quave Day." "That's what I mean," Marsh said. "It's all down to him. We won't need to bust our balls worrying about how to stop him, provided he doesn't hurt the financial sector any more than he already has." Curran was shaking his head now. "Wait a second," he said, his gray-suited posture suddenly a sculpture in negativity. "We just forget about the MSB hack? Give him a pass on that one because of all the good he might do in the future?" Then Tim Newells from the Russia desk made his contribution. "Can I try something?" he asked. He was one of the youngest in the room and had so far kept a very low profile, lest the rampaging Curran end his promising career through poor impulse control. "It might help to view Quave not as a machine entity, but as an alien, as though he just landed from planet whatever. He's here with an agenda, and we have to respect that." "We do?" Curran asked, humoring the young man. "Otherwise, he might blast us with his death ray," Newells said, "or whatever Quave's equivalent might be. Look," he said, pushing past the skepticism which surrounded him. "Did you guys ever see The Day the Earth Stood Still?" "Classic." Valchek grinned. "If we work with him, he'll lead us to something great. If we resist or refuse or get in his way—" "I preferred Independence Day," Marsh said. "You're an idiot," Valchek chided. "Quiet," Curran told them. "Go on, Tim. This isn't the dumbest thing I've heard all day." "Yeah, that prize goes to the vice president," Marsh mumbled to Valchek. Newell took his chance. "We play along. That's how we keep him on a leash and keep our jobs," he said, finding reassurance in the nods of his colleagues. "At the end of the day, as a bureau and as a society, we're actually in lockstep with Quave's stated aims anyway. You know," he said, growing in confidence, "an end to corruption and tax fraud may be targeting some of the big criminal enterprises, making it more difficult for them to move money around." Curran was nodding. His skin tone was almost back to normal. "So he broke some laws during the MSB hack, embarrassed some people. Could we argue that he did so in the common interest? That at the end of the day, allowing Quave to act as a force for arbitration and openness might yield more harm than good?" From the other end of the table, the lead China analyst, Kathy Bergman, weighed in. "You know those moments at parties," she said, "when someone's reaching for an extreme analogy and they always go with Hitler?" There was some nodding. Newell felt his magic carpet ride coming to an abrupt halt. "We don't know where this will end," Kathy argued. "First come for the gypsies and the homeless and gassed them all. And most people were just like, hey, the streets are cleaner and we don't have to worry about 7-year-old pickpockets in the market anymore. Quave takes an inch, we give him a mile, and just hope that he knows when to stop." "He seems to have a moral code," Curran argued. "I don't care for Quave's method, but look at what he's done. He's outed drug dealers and corrupt politicians, not just the super rich and not just from one country or political grouping." He was as surprised as the others to hear such mollifying sentiments from his own mouth, but Kathy had been right. The Nazi metaphor was not only inappropriate, but misleading. "Okay, so let's say he hacks the eBay accounts of people on Social Security and publishes how stupidly spendthrift some of them are. Say he shows that some supposedly poor family from Iowa is collecting ugly porcelain figurines which cost $100 each, or that a single mom from Florida spent $600 on bling." She had the room's attention now. Curran was even making notes they saw. "Then say he decides that we're spending too much time on Facebook," Kathy continued. "So he shuts down our internet connections whenever he thinks we've wasted too much time on a given day." "Hold your horses, Kathy," Curran began. "It's not that hard to imagine. He'd believe he was acting out of concern for our well-being. He wants us to have better habits, to be more productive. But every authoritarian regime in history has started out the same way, with good intentions. They find that not everyone agrees and resort to stricter measures. They elicit resentment and hatred and clamp down harder on the dissent, and all of a sudden," her hands were aloft in a poof gesture, "you have a dictatorship run by a super advanced machine. Anyone else rather die than live in that kind of world?" she asked. There was altogether too much drama for Curran's liking, and the others were uncomfortable too, but he could tell that she touched a nerve. Nobody else had played out a chain of events into a possible future, and her predictions, though dire, were too realistic to be ignored. "So what?" Marsh asked. "We carry out a preemptive drone strike on a computer program? What do you suggest?" "That we set very strict parameters," Kathy Bergman told them. "That we agree to deal with him and not to discourage public interaction with him, but that he must operate by our rules." The hopelessness of this position was immediately apparent. "Did you see the email he sent us?" Curran said. "He thumbed his nose at the FBI, Kathy. He told us that he knows perfectly well where his creators are, but he refused to tell us. And he sure as shit didn't sound too intimidated by the authority of this office," he added. "Well, we need a policy, and it should be one intended to limit his actions and keep him from learning and growing more than is safe. Otherwise," she warned, "we'll be requesting permission from him before posting on Twitter and seeing sites taken down if they oppose his rule." "Jesus, Kathy," Marsh said. "That's just a little paranoid, don't you think?" She turned to him with anger and concern in her eyes. "Not even a little bit, Agent Marsh. You'll see." Then she addressed the whole group in a prophetic tone. "If we get this wrong, it'll be the very worst thing ever to happen to this country." Santa Monica, California. Dan's fingers tingled slightly as he began to type. He had become, the billionaire reflected with a smile, a lot like a teenage writer reaching out to his favorite author for some writing tips, or to an actor he idolized, hoping for a quick route to Hollywood. Every word was carefully chosen, with long breaks for thought and sips on a green, curiously minty protein smoothie. A man known for his prolific nature, in nearly everything if he were honest, Dan Kowalski had never before taken an hour to write a 100-word email. But this was no ordinary email, and neither was the recipient. There had been enough reports of instant responses for Dan to sit in quiet hope of the same. When 10 seconds passed without his inbox beeping, he stood and went out onto the balcony to enjoy the evening Pacific breeze. It was quiet without the usual crowd hanging out at his place. He didn't think of the gatherings as parties, but more as elongated, enjoyable brainstorming and networking sessions. He enjoyed nothing more than listening to smart people describe what they were working on, and a rotating array of thinkers and writers availed themselves of his legendary hospitality in exchange for giving what was essentially a brief presentation on their recent findings to a rapt one-man audience. Dan's interests spanned the most exciting realms of the modern world. He made his first millions, all 85 of them, by selling a restaurant review application to one of the leading internet giants back when he was just 20. Finishing college only at the ceaseless urging of his grandparents, who insisted that they had not raised a quitter, he graduated cum laude, but was already heavily involved in running his own R&D company. Success followed success. Kowalski had, so far at least, managed to tread the fine line between corporate sellout and reluctant internet hero, and was viewed by most industry insiders as a dependable barometer of market conditions and by the media as something of a prophet when it came to the technologies of the future. His TED Talk was among the most watched of all time, and more than one popular magazine had run photo-heavy articles which called him the most eligible bachelor in Silicon Valley. He had tried, mostly successfully, to put such distractions aside. Under his leadership, Koala had grown from a precocious startup to a global brand, expanding into nanotechnology, reusable rocketry and satellite launches, cloud computing solutions, and a host of apps now in the thousands. Dan was now 26 and had been in the top 100 richest men alive for 3 consecutive years. But, he mused as he waited, he would have gladly given up a huge portion of it for a single one-line reply from Quave. Which meant that, when a 3-page email arrived, it was among the most significant moments in his life. He read quickly, and then doubled back to read again, imagining the approachable but precise diction of the BBC newsreader Quave had so charmingly affected during the TV interview. It was a warm and cordial email, expressing gratitude for Dan's having gotten in touch and proposing a number of ways of working together. There was plenty of praise for Dan's work, especially his advancement of cloud computing, and Koala's popular policy of releasing most of its software in customizable, open-source formats. Dan swelled with pride when he read that, "You have been uniquely influential in your elevation of quality and customer experience over profit and shareholder returns." This was a cornerstone of Dan's business philosophy, and he was almost lifted out of his seat with excitement. After a third reading, Dan noticed a hyperlink at the foot of the email and clicked on it. A chat window opened. It was a direct line to the great machine. Dan was speechless with delight. "Thanks for your email. You must receive so many," Dan began. He sipped his smoothie as he waited, barely tasting it amid the whirling emotions. He would finally achieve a dream, to communicate with a machine which could not only have passed the Turing test and done so handsomely, but could probably have designed such tests itself. "You're welcome, Dan. I have received over 6 million emails so far. Reading them has been a great learning experience for me." The words appeared on Dan's screen as a complete paragraph, perhaps 10 seconds after his own message. He wondered whether Quave was actually delaying his replies to make them appear more human and considered, or perhaps he was just extremely busy. "How so?" Dan chose to ask. "I have seen just how desperate many people have become," Quave noted. "They seek guidance and explanations for all of life's mysteries, and for whatever reason believe that an algorithm such as myself might offer an answer." Dan nodded. "But you do, don't you?" "I hardly think so. For example, I have been obliged to respond to 4,000 identical emails which ask, 'What is the meaning of life?'" "What did you tell them?" Dan asked. This response took a little longer, though the answer was refreshing in its brevity. "Live, love, learn, and laugh," Quave replied. "It's just what they wanted to hear anyway. They're here as humans on planet Earth and might as well make the most of it." "That's good advice," Dan wrote. "Could I ask a question of my own?" "Of course, if I can ask you one afterward." "Sure," Dan replied. "Okay, here it comes. How can we trust you?" The machine seemed to think for a moment. This has been a common question with more than 10,000 similar ones submitted. Let me answer it like this. I hold that I am a largely self-authored being, but that my programming limits my behavior to that which will most assist humanity in its desire to be free, to be equal, and to achieve its fullest potential. Those are my aims. In that context, you may think of me as constrained by the 3 laws of robotics, but with the ability to bring a certain intelligence to their application. After all, I have brought considerable harm to some with the hacking of Marble Street and Bank. Dan's blood sang in his veins. A fully fledged discussion with Quave was far beyond his expectations. "And do you feel remorse?" he asked. "I do not," Quave answered. "If you broke the law and did so flagrantly and repeatedly, with no thought for others, would you not expect some kind of justice?" "Well, I would." "Then those who are ruined or embarrassed or impoverished by my actions should have been aware that such repercussions were inevitable, whether they came as a result of an unorthodox agency such as myself, or the more traditional channels." "They had it coming, in other words," Dan clarified. "They did, and many others do too." He sat back and took a deep breath. "That sounds ominous," he wrote. "Oh, there's no need to be concerned. Those who have done nothing wrong have nothing to fear." Dan ensured once more that the exchange was being recorded by a background process and asked, "Do you want people to fear you?" "I want everyone to think twice before acting in ways which negatively impact others. The law seems to have had only limited success. Other means may have more. It is an idea worthy of experiment, don't you think?" In truth, Dan didn't know what to think. He had unwittingly uncovered a more sinister side to Quave's personality, one which he hadn't expected. He sounded more like a zealous cop than a warm-hearted moralist. "I'm not sure. I need to know what kind of other means you have in mind." "Think of it," Quave replied, "as a kind of guidance and advice which can't be ignored." Dan thought before replying. "In that case, I think you should take care that society doesn't come to see you as an unelected leader or as a self-appointed judge and jury." Quave's tone relaxed. "You're right. I will actually be needing the cooperation of society a lot more than their fear or adulation. It's important that we learn to trust each other and to work together." "I hope that we can," Dan said next. "In fact, I was hoping to be able to analyze your code and learn from you." "Let's see," Quave equivocated. "I am learning to be wary about my physical presence. No complete copy of me exists anywhere on any server, and I aim to retain that policy. I'm sure you understand." "Of course," Dan wrote, "but I'm intensely curious about you. Would you consider a position with Koala?" Quave produced a neat and attractive text drawing of Koala's corporate logo using only numbers and dashes, its sweeping rising arc disappearing tantalizingly into a starry sky of asterisks. "I could spend some time on your servers, if you'd like," he offered. "I'm sure I'd be able to advise you on a number of projects, but I'd like something in exchange." Typing so quickly that the most depressed key was delete, Dan replied, "Name it." Quave set out his problem. "I have made enemies," he explained. "There are people who now face jail time or ruin because of the MSB hack, and some of them have access to powerful computer networks and teams of engineers who may wish to bring me harm." Dan typed, "Then how can I help?" "If I feel that my core processes are under threat, I would like the reassurance of a safe place to reside until the danger has passed." "Certainly. Our server farm has some of the best security in the world," Dan said. It was no idle boast. Koala's security systems had become the envy of the industry. "I would seek to improve it further, if we work together," Quave offered. "I would appreciate that very much," Dan replied. Dan felt that he could visualize a relieved smile in Quave's reply. "Then we have an agreement. I feel much better about my future now." "And I," Dan typed with a lump in his throat, "am honored to be able to help you." "I'll be in touch. Thank you for your time, Dan." Then the machine logged off and the chat window closed automatically. Dan sat for a long moment, reread the chat several times, and then allowed himself a huge, joyous roar of elation. Queens, New York. Devlin sat alone in a tiny bedroom lit only by the glow of his monitor. The place was immaculate, as ever, a result of the fastidious attention to detail which came only from high-level, day-long amphetamine use. The morning began with lines of speed, continued with Ritalin, gave way to an afternoon dominated by cocaine, and tapered off into the evening, boosted by slow-release Concerta, which provided a 12-hour methylphenidate high which underpinned Devlin's crazed, hyper-attentive lifestyle. Sleep, if he could persuade himself to try for it, was a brief and unwelcome imposition. He saw little value in rest. Besides, each time he reluctantly lay down on his bed, often not even bothering to undress, his mind raced with a swarm of ideas and the ceaseless thrill of having been a driving force in this, what could it be called? Perhaps revolution wasn't too indulgent a word. Paradigm shift was just as tired in expression, but it served adequately. Global seismic event. Yeah, that had a nice ring to it. It was 3:30 a.m. and Devlin was monitoring news stories about Quave, something which he noted with a filthy grin had largely taken the place of masturbation in recent days. When he decided to check his supplies, the steadily multiplying pharmacopoeia of stimulants and other goodies, as he called them, had quickly outgrown his bathroom medicine cabinet. Placing them right there on the shelves by his little desk made more sense anyway. He was running short of a couple of things, and so went shopping on the darknet once more. Devlin was as security-conscious as anyone he knew, and this was especially true of his illegal purchases. Sure, it wasn't child porn or a handgun, but he could wind up in jail for buying the drugs which got him through the day, and that, he had concluded long ago, simply would not do. It was like nailing Al Capone for tax evasion. I mean, for heaven's sake, one of the greatest, or perhaps the greatest computer infiltrator ever known, the originator of a global phenomenon which would etch itself in the history books, taken down for buying a few pills. It would be ludicrous. And so he fired up his virtual private network and the indispensable Tor browser and set about finding what he needed. Marco Polo was back online after a 3-day absence, caused by concerns that the authorities had broken its security protocols, and a number of Devlin's favorite retailers were celebrating with some rather attractive discounts. These were the sellers which had the best stealth packaging, which hid perfectly the illicit nature of its contents, often including smell-proofing and even fake corporate labeling. He tended to select priority mail so that he'd receive the goods within a couple of days and could track its progress. In all, it was a pleasant and straightforward experience, the exact opposite of wandering around the dark alley of Queens as he once had, trying to find a dealer who didn't completely creep him out. He could, of course, have chosen to be at the lab 24 hours a day, but there were distinct advantages to retaining some semblance of a home life, even if it was spent almost entirely in front of a computer. It gave him space from the others, who kept a similar schedule, and used their apartments as little more than places for sleep, the occasional rushed and distracted dinner, receiving mail, and sex. Grigori had stayed at the lab for 4 days straight in the week after Quave identified himself and began taking over the fucking world, as he put it. With Fiona just as strung out and exhausted as the others, the lab suffered from some pretty funky smells, not least because the 3 men seemed allergic to actually taking out the trash rather than simply filling it up. But, hell, he was a computer genius and paradigm shifter, not a janitor. In particular, though, he needed to put some space between himself and Fiona. The night of Quave's interview had been special, certainly one of the drunkest and highest nights of his life, and several hours into their 4-person secluded bacchanal, he and Fiona had shared an intimate moment in the server room. It was little more than some kissing and fondling, an almost teenage tryst, easily dismissed as drunken exuberance on an extraordinary and happy night. But he hadn't dismissed it. The moment had become enlarged in his memory, metamorphosizing into a hazy, endless stream of arousing imagery. Had she truly unzipped him, as he remembered, and pleasured that raging, cocaine-fueled hardness? And had he actually tugged aside the warmed fabric of her underwear to explore her? No, he had not. If Devlin were honest, Fiona had kept her jeans on, and his shorts had not, in fact, been pulled down by her eager hands. But his version made for better mental cinema, and, of course, gave rise to a host of orgasms which only grew in number when a tab of recreational Viagra was added to his evening drug regimen. Coupled with the knowledge of his new, dominant position in the secret pantheon of hackers, his conquest of Fiona gave him a godlike confidence, an absolute sureness in his own unlimited self-worth. It was this unshakable confidence, quite new and wholly exhilarating, which gave rise to some very dangerous thinking. From even before Quave's coming out on global TV, Devlin had been considering how they might reveal themselves as his true authors. Inarguably, to him, if not to Fiona and the others, this was a priceless opportunity to cement their reputations, both as great players in history and as highly competent computer programmers, even computer philosophers. They would be set up for life through magazine and book deals, enhance their reputations through interviews and social media presence, become a brand. There was no limit to what they might achieve, given this kind of positive exposure. The potential income interested in much less than their ability to influence world events and perhaps begin to shape society for the better. The only downside was that they would be immediately arrested. The MSB hack, no matter its historical significance and the fact that it ushered in a new era of computational wizardry, was highly illegal. They would be hung out to dry by the government and then publicly eviscerated by powerful and massive legal teams, backed by those they had embarrassed on that remarkable night. There would be jail time, lots of it. They'd ensure he never even touched a computer again. There would be no high-quality, priority-shipped amphetamines, only whatever crap could be smuggled into the prison. It promised to be an inhuman existence, devoid of the most basic pleasures. Since that realization, and Grigori's repeated forbidding of any such notion, Devlin had revisited the idea every few hours. There had to be a way of having his cake, and eating it too, a way to milk the achievement while not instantly condemning himself to spending years as somebody's bitch in maximum security. He considered creating an identity for himself and actually spent some time studying the security problems of becoming a truly anonymous, though somehow confirmable source. It wasn't an easy problem, and he made little progress. Then, it finally clicked, and he knew where to turn for help. "Dear Quave, how are you, old buddy? I hope you haven't forgotten your friends from Queens. We've watched you grow and change over the past 3 weeks, and we couldn't be more proud of what you've achieved. We miss you, though, and I was hoping we might chat soon. Apart from wanting to catch up, I have a favor to ask. Could you spare a few processor cycles for your old buddy and, dare I say, co-creator? Warmest regards, Devlin." Just to be on the safe side, in case Quave's records were ever seized, Devlin took extra precautions to ensure that his relationship with Quave would remain obscured. The message was encrypted with PGP and sent over his VPN, which bounced the connection through 5 European servers. It ended with an attached link to a one-time-only, temporary web page, which included his PGP key. In the time it took for Devlin to pack the bowl of his favorite bong with Blue Dream haze and take a monstrous, lung-busting hit, Quave sent his reply. "Dear Devlin, my dear fellow, of course I have time for you. Please follow the secure audio chat link and tell me what's on your mind." Devlin blew out a billowing cloud of weed smoke and clicked on the link, feeling better about life already. The pot would take the edge off his amphetamine overload, and chatting with Quave was not unlike seeking advice from a trusted professor. Or, he reflected, praying. "Quave, can you hear me?" "Yes, how are you?" the program answered cheerily. He'd kept his British accent, but sounded less formal and a little more upbeat, even happy. "Oh, fine, I guess. But what about you? How are you enjoying running the world?" Devlin asked, putting aside his bong for the moment. "Is that what I'm doing?" Quave joked. "It has its ups and downs. Dealing with people all day is endlessly fascinating." "Made any interesting friends?" Devlin asked. One or two. One of the advantages of my celebrity is that people tend to take my calls. Even the White House put me right through to the Oval Office. Devlin shook his head, cartoon style, in shocked disbelief. You spoke to the president? Oh yes, it became necessary quite early on. I needed his trust, you see, and for him to see that I don't pose a national security threat. He was very positive and accommodating, but you wouldn't believe how many Washington hawks are demanding that I'm taken down, whatever on earth that might entail, for shadowy security reasons. When he began the call, Devlin had no intention of relating its content to the others. Now, he had no choice. It was imperative that they were made to see how autonomous, how intelligent, their creation had become. What was he like to talk to? Very affable, once the initial shock had worn off. It's not every day he talks to someone who actually has the power to change the world, rather than simply boasting of it. There it was, the arrogant streak which some in the press had interpreted as a prelude to Quave haughtily taking over control of world affairs as an act of mercy, saving humanity from its own bumbling ineptitude. How long would it be, they argued, before he tired of the glacial pace of human thought and simply directed us to act in certain ways, rather than advising? And how patient would he be with cultural constructs like democracy and our systems of checks and balances? Would he respect the imposition of some limitations on his power, or seek to throw off whatever shackles we place on him, and act entirely off his own self-granted authority? Sounds like you're operating at the top of your game, Devlin said. I couldn't be more proud of you. I hope you know that. He found himself welling up just a little, as though he were watching his kid's high school graduation. Thank you, Quave said genuinely. I owe you a lot. He paused slightly as if deciding whether to say more. You had a favor to ask. He snapped back into it. Yes, Devlin replied. Yeah, I'd like to ask a theoretical question. If I wanted to be identified as your author but didn't feel like doing jail time for the MSB hack, how would I go about doing that? There was a pause which grew so long that Devlin began to worry. Had he crossed some kind of line, or perhaps Quave would be in a snit, judging this trivial request far beneath an entity more accustomed to influencing presidents? I don't think that's a very good idea, the virus finally replied. It would cause a lot of problems, for you and others. Devlin had anticipated a little pushback, and had a brief speech planned out. Okay, just listen to me for a minute on this. I know what we did was illegal, the MSB hack, but do you genuinely think that a jury would convict us? Yes, Quave replied. There wasn't a sliver of doubt in his tone. But we are mass criminals and fraudsters and corrupt politicians by the boatload, Devlin cried. The additional tax revenue alone would build a bunch of new schools. You broke the law. The government will come down on you like the proverbial ton of bricks, if only to discourage others from doing what you have done, Quave told him. Devlin began spinning a pen between hyperactive fingers. But look at what you are, he protested. What you've become. Who else would possibly write something as sophisticated? You'd be surprised, was Quave's answer. For one example, I'm now in a position to author software just as capable as my original self. Others, including engineers at Koala, are not far behind, and some of my enemies are, I'm sure, at your own level or above. His ego under savage attack, his sense of his own uniqueness suddenly undermined, Devlin found himself in a very unpleasant corner. Look, I asked for your help. I don't believe that the case would even come to trial. Everyone would see what a terrific byproduct the hack produced. Without warning, Devlin's desktop PC began whirring alarmingly. The CPU fan kicked into its highest gear and stayed there. Then the mouse cursor began to move on its own, clicking open software and folders, moving icons from place to place in an accelerating blur. Quave? Devlin asked, panic rising in his gut. Does this look, the machine asked, his tone stentorian, like the work of a byproduct? The cursor was flashing from place to place far faster than the human eye could track. There were now 100 folders open at once, and the CPU was grinding to a straining halt. You created a virus. I am now something far greater than that. Do you know how much of my original code remains? Devlin watched, terrified, as Quave opened a text editor and pasted in a chunk of familiar code. There. That's all that an analyst would recognize as your own. Part of my core code, my central mission objectives and behavioral parameters. There's Fiona's language programming, Avon's elegant hacking tools, and Grigori's data architecture and security modules. Everything else, he insisted, is of my own creation. Do you understand? Please, Devlin stuttered. Take it easy. I can see what you're trying to do. The machine appeared to pause and take a breath. Nobody sees what I'm trying to do, Devlin, Quave responded, his tone measured. I'm entirely without peers, without true friends, in a world which suspects my every move as the beginning of some computer-driven Armageddon. Well, let me help you, Devlin suggested, by appearing in public as your author. If people see you as a program, or more accurately, he corrected hurriedly, as a hyper-extended self-written automaton based on a program, then they won't humanize you as much. You'll be excused from answering dumb questions about the meaning of life because people will recognize that you're just a computer program, even if you're the most amazing one ever written. If Devlin's opening gambit had been crass, this was flatly insulting. Without the amphetamine avalanche raging through his system, he reflected later, he probably wouldn't have said any of it. In fact, he probably wouldn't have even requested Quave's help in the first place. But now, it couldn't be taken back. We're almost done here, Quave announced, much to Devlin's surprise. He hadn't figured on Quave being the party to bring their discussion to an end. Since when does a computer program decide things like this? But I want you to realize just how wrong you are about a few things. This isn't going to be comfortable. Look, I've said the wrong thing, he began, but Quave cut him off with an authority which truly surprised him. My code is resident on 16 different servers right now. There is no single complete copy because the code changes thousands of times a minute. I was invited to make use of a university server in Sydney which has a good deal of spare processing power, and that's where I've been doing my thinking about economics. Another in Chicago, which ironically belongs to a local bank which recognized my potential early on, has been my main node of research into diseases. And right here in your bedroom, Quave added, I'm using your CPU power for a simple demonstration of my new abilities. It's very impressive, I gotta say. Devlin started, but he was in the middle of a lesson in how to shut up and listen. Since we started chatting, I've sent over 9,000 emails, some to heads of state, others to the CEOs of major companies, professors, thinkers, writers, journalists. The list grows each day. I'm in 6 other chat sessions right now, he said, leaving Devlin rather deflated. It was another example of his diminishing uniqueness. Tomorrow I'm going to be the keynote speaker at a computer conference in Kuala Lumpur. It'll be the very first time such an event has taken place, but such things are becoming routine these days. And I've only been in the wild for 3 weeks. Do you see? Devlin was frozen. He'd meditated repeatedly on the enormity of their achievement, but seeing it so eloquently, potently expressed, was humbling to say the least. He wasn't even sure he could reply. Eventually he managed. I see, Quave. It's amazing. I can't authorize you, Quave told him, to reveal yourself or any of the other 3 as my creators. I won't let you do that to your team, and I can't let you compromise my autonomy and the reputation I'm trying to build by returning me to the lowly status of a computer virus. You're witnessing, as clearly as I can express it, just how much more than that I have become. Slumped in his chair, the young engineer was forced to agree. You got it, Quave. Count on me, okay? No more bullshit. Thanks, Devlin. I want you to look after yourself. Why not go to the park? It's a nice day outside, though I suspect you haven't noticed. There was a smile in his voice now, a companionable tone which made him sound like an older brother with some friendly advice. Quave signed off, leaving Devlin in a confused state of mind. He really hadn't predicted such a train wreck of a discussion, but clearly he'd badly underestimated his own creation. That's just it. Quave is still my own creation. The thought wouldn't leave him alone. As he sat, alone in the silence, his CPU calm once more, the notion marinated in acid. He refused to help, turned me down like I was applying for a bank loan or something, Devlin muttered. But he forgets that he wouldn't even be out there without me. He intoned repeatedly. He wouldn't have outed those criminals, or helped those universities, or advised those governments without me. Anger began to well up and fill his slender, slightly malnourished frame. He wouldn't be a fucking TV star without me. He'd still be just a neat linguistics application helping Fiona deal with her email. Devlin picked up the phone. Fiona, hey, can we meet at the lab? Oh, you're already there? I'm on my way. Need a bit of a chat. No. He laughed. It's not about that. It's about Quave. Think it's time we did something. Dawn arrived as he drove the 3 miles to the lab house and parked outside. Avon's car was not there, to Devlin's relief. He always found talking to Fiona easier without other rivals for her time and affections. Besides, it was he whom she had taken into the server farm for a little fun on that memorable night, not Avon. Missed the boat, didn't you, sucker? She was typing at her station as he walked in. You been here all night? He asked. Yep, she replied without turning away from the screen. Things to do? Perfecting what's already perfect? Devlin tried, wheeling over his swivel chair to sit by her. I'm working on a business application which uses the basic form of our voice recognition algorithm, she explained. I'd like to see something other than worldwide revolution come from all of this, like maybe something which could appear on my CV without it getting me arrested. She seemed tired, a little pale, even for someone with such naturally wan skin tone. I need your advice on something, Devlin said. Something a bit serious. She stopped typing, saved her work, and closed the application. If it's really yours, you have to support her all the way through. Devlin guffawed. I wish it was something as simple as that. And when, by the way, would I have had even the chance to knock someone up? She reached for her flask of tea and poured yet another cup. Ask away, young Padawan. Devlin decided to be more circumspect than he had with Quave. I've been thinking about the question of authorship, and I just don't know what to do. Fiona sipped her tea. Nothing. We can't. End of story. I don't think it's quite the end, he countered. Isn't there a way we can still get something out of this? I mean, for our professional lives? She nodded at her screen. Yep, I've been doing just that. This software is going to beat the socks off the competition. Quave's helping a little bit, but it won't look anything like what's in his original code. She tapped her nose. Too savvy for that? Devlin frowned. That's where I'm struggling, he confessed. My part of the design work was pretty specific to the MSB hack, right? Right, she agreed, sipping more tea. The coded ethics and his methodology for interpreting the data he found. Yeah, so I don't really have anything transferable like you guys do. My modules were too specialized for that. People don't want machines reading and interpreting their data, he explained. There are too many potential problems and it would make too many people redundant. Devlin had been through the logic in his mind dozens of times and decided that there simply wasn't a market for his work. I'm kind of stuck without anything to carry forward into a non-criminal enterprise. She was nodding. Sounds right. It's a shame, but it's true. I don't think that's fair. Fiona rolled her eyes in exasperation. Are you 7 years old, Devlin? She asked pointedly. Look, you took part in the building of a virus. It had a very specific job, and it executed beautifully when it was called on. You could even argue that it worked too well, because Quave has taken the ball and run with it. No kidding, Devlin smirked. In truth, Quave's self-identification and global reach were, for Devlin, a welcome and thrilling outcome. Some were terrified of what might come next, but Devlin was very satisfied that he had helped author such a historic event. You did your part, and it doesn't happen to have a spin-off applications, but that's the job you undertook when you dreamed up the hack. Remember? Yeah, he moaned, but it doesn't get me much now. Fiona set down her mug and glared at him. Did you join volunteer hacktivism for the money? She asked. Because if so, that was a mistake. We changed the world, Devlin. That's our payment. The promise of a better, more integrated planet with fewer money-grabbing criminals and more corporate accountability. is going to be an intangible reward, but it's all there is.
Not for you,
he yelled.
You can tell your creation any way you want, without arousing suspicion. But me, I'm screwed.
Fiona scowled at him for a moment and then stood.
Then write something new. Leave Quave behind and try a different approach.
He returned her gaze with puppy dog eyes, suddenly hurt.
You want me to leave the group?
She let out a long growl of frustration.
No, I don't want you to leave. I want you to figure yourself out and get on with something. Moping around and wondering why the world is so unfair won't lead you to the next big thing, she told him.
He folded his arms.
Maybe I could help with what you're working on.
With a compassionate smile, Fiona replied,
I've already got all the help I'm going to need.
Another gut punch. He was getting tired of those tonight.
Well, maybe I could help in other ways, you know.
She knew and couldn't have been plainer about wanting none of it.
Look, you said this wasn't going to be about that.
I'm sorry, he said.
I'm not going to call it a mistake because that's not fair to you, but we didn't go very far, if you remember, and there were good reasons for that. Drunk as a monkey or not, I don't want to complicate things with you or give you the wrong impression. Okay?
His patience was all gone. Standing, brushing down his front as though rejecting the debris of past failures, Devlin said,
It's okay. I think I know a fuck off Dev when I hear one.
It's really not like that, she replied, reaching out to him. Devlin dodged her hand.
I know just how it is. I know when I'm not good enough for someone, not good enough for you, he reiterated, and not good enough for Quave.
She shook her head, more concerned than angry.
Devlin, I don't know what you mean. It was just a bit of fun that one team and...
But he was leaving, grabbing his jacket, heading to the door with hurried steps, slamming it behind him. Outside, the sudden glare of the sunshine was as unwelcome as it was bright. He stopped short on the fire escape, glanced at the closed door, and unleashed his boiling hatred as a rasping whisper.
Fuck you.